10 unsung heroes of R&B soul music who died penniless and forgotten. This is a list of 10 names, and I want to be careful about how I introduce it, because when I say these artists died penniless and forgotten, I am not being dramatic, I am being precise. These are not stories of near misses. These are not stories of late recognition that almost came. These are the stories of voices that built this music. And what the industry did to those voices once it was done with them. 10 names, every one of them earned a different ending. None of them got it. Let's begin. Number 10, Nolan Strong. Before I tell you what the industry did to this man, I need to tell you who he was. Nolan Strong was born in Scottsboro, Alabama in 1934. He grew up in Detroit, and in 1950, still a teenager, he formed a vocal group at Central High School. He called them the Diablos. In 1954, they recorded a song called The Wind. And what happened next is the kind of thing that tells you exactly what kind of music this was. The Wind did not chart nationally. I want to be precise about this. What it did instead was something more durable. It moved like a ghost through the city of Detroit, through the jukebox circuits and the neighborhood clubs, until it became the sound that an entire generation of Detroit singers grew up trying to reproduce. Smokey Robinson, who became one of the great voices of Motown, named Nolan Strong as one of his 5 vocal idols. 5. The others were Clyde McPhatter, Frankie Lymon, Sam Cooke, and Jackie Wilson. That is the company in which Smokey Robinson placed this name. Lou Reed told Rolling Stone magazine, "If I could really sing, I'd be Nolan Strong." And I need you to hold that for a moment. Fortune Records, the small, family-operated Detroit label that owned Nolan Strong's recordings, did not have the distribution, the promotional infrastructure, or the commercial ambition to take what he had and put it where it belonged. By 1964, the Diablos had dissolved. By the late 1960s, Nolan Strong had largely disappeared from public life. That sentence appears in every account of him. Little is known about the last years of his life. And that sentence is its own kind of verdict. A man whose influence ran in a direct line to Smokey Robinson, and his final years are a blank. Nolan Strong died on February 21, 1977. He was 43 years old. He was buried in Detroit, in an unmarked grave. It took 30 years, and a campaign by a single dedicated fan, including a memorial concert to raise the funds, before Nolan Strong's grave had a marker. If this name was in your house growing up, if your family knew that music, you already know exactly what I am saying. And if this name is new to you, that is not your fault. But it cannot stay that way. Number 9, Major Lance. Let me tell you who this was before I tell you what happened. Major Lance was born in Winterville, Mississippi in 1939. He grew up in Chicago. As a young man, he attended Wells High School alongside Curtis Mayfield and Jerry Butler. That school, that hallway, that density of talent concentrated in a single building. By 1963, Major Lance had signed with OK Records. Curtis Mayfield was writing his material. That year, The Monkey Time entered the national charts, reaching number 2 on the R&B chart and number 8 on the pop chart. A string of Mayfield-penned hits followed. Hey Little Girl, The Matador. Major Lance was, for that brief window in the early 1960s, one of the central voices of Chicago soul. The voice of a city in the middle of its greatest musical decade. That is the portrait. Here is what the industry returned. In 1968, Lance's relationship with OK ended. He moved from label to label through the early 1970s. In 1978, he was convicted of distributing cocaine and sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. When he came out, his moment had passed. In 1987, a heart attack halted whatever comeback the road might have offered. The years that followed left him nearly blind from glaucoma. He continued to perform on the smaller circuits in the Carolinas, where his earlier records had found a regional following. He gave everything he had left. His last performance was at the Chicago Blues Festival in June 1994. 3 months later, on September 3, 1994, Major Lance died in Decatur, Georgia. He was 55 years old, and whether the industry's silence in his final years was an accident of timing or something more considered, I think you already know how to answer that question. One thing I will tell you, because it is both true and extraordinary, Major Lance's daughter, Keisha Lance Bottoms, became the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, a legacy that traveled in a direction no one expected. From a man who died largely forgotten to a woman who governed a major American city. Real talk, only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's $1 coffee a month, and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. Number 8, Don Covay. Before I tell you his name, let me tell you what his songs did. In 1964, Don Covay recorded Mercy Mercy with his group The Good Timers. The guitarist on that session was a young man doing session work in New York who had not yet become famous. His name was Jimi Hendrix. That recording, Covay's voice over that guitar, established a sound and a feel that the decade was about to need. The Rolling Stones heard it and covered it the following year, using it as the lead track on the American version of their 1965 album, Out of Our Heads. That album became the Rolling Stones' first #1 album in the United States. The song that opened it belonged to Don Covay. He also wrote Chain of Fools. You know that recording. Aretha Franklin recorded it in 1967, and it became one of the defining moments of her entire career. She won a Grammy for it. Aretha Franklin won a Grammy for a Don Covay song. He wrote Pony Time, which reached #1 for Chubby Checker. He co-wrote Seesaw with Steve Cropper, a top 10 hit for Aretha Franklin. There is a pattern running through this list, and I want you to hold on to it. An artist creates something extraordinary. That creation becomes a gift to the culture. The culture benefits enormously. The artist does not. I want you to hold on to that pattern, because I will show you its most complete and deliberate form before we are done. Don Covay suffered a massive stroke in 1992. He was 54 years old. The stroke left him debilitated. For the next 23 years, until the day he died, he battled the effects of that stroke. 23 years of incapacitation for the man who handed the Rolling Stones their first American #1, who gave Aretha Franklin a Grammy-winning performance, who had Jimi Hendrix play guitar on his record before the world knew who Jimi Hendrix was. Don Covay died on January 31, 2015. There was no ceremony that matched what he had given to this music. Number 7. O.V. Wright. Overton. Curtis Wright, known to the people who loved this music as O.V. Wright. In 1964, O.V. Wright recorded a song called "That's How Strong My Love Is." He wrote it, he sang it, and the performance was, I want to be careful to earn this word, elemental. The sound of a voice doing the thing that the greatest soul voices do, locating something the listener did not know they were carrying and placing it directly in front of them. Otis Redding heard it and covered it. The Rolling Stones heard it and covered it. That is not a footnote. That is a measure. Two of the most celebrated acts in the history of popular music heard what O.V. Wright had done and felt the need to try to do it themselves. Wright went on to record with producer Willie Mitchell and the High Rhythm section in Memphis. The same room, the same musicians who would later record Al Green. His work in the early 1970s, A Nickel and a Nail, Ace of Spades, I Can't Take It, stands among the finest deep soul recordings ever committed to tape. His voice operated at a depth that felt almost frightening. He gave you everything. He asked for nothing in return. That is the truth of what happened, because the industry gave him nothing in return either. In the mid-1970s, Wright was imprisoned for narcotics offenses. Commercial success did not follow his release. He continued to record, he continued to perform. On November 16, 1980, O.V. Wright suffered a heart attack in Mobile, Alabama. He was 41 years old. He died while performing on a stage at Joe's Supper Club in Grand Bay, giving everything he had to the last moment he had left. He was buried in Memphis, in an unmarked grave. In 2008, 28 years after his death, a memorial fund purchased a headstone for O.V. Wright's previously unmarked resting place. I know, I felt the same way when I found that. His songs were sampled by the Wu-Tang Clan decades after he died. His name remains unknown to most people who have heard his music, and I will say clearly what most people won't. That is not an accident of history. That is an outcome the industry produced and was comfortable leaving in place. This channel exists to make sure these names are not lost. Number 6. Howard Tate. Let me tell you what the music industry did with Howard Tate's work before I tell you what it did to Howard Tate. In the late 1960s, Tate recorded a string of singles with producer Jerry Ragavoy for Verve Records. The most celebrated of these was a song called Get It While You Can. Janis Joplin heard it and recorded her own version. It became one of the defining recordings of her career, a song she performed from the largest stages in the world. B.B. King covered Ain't Nobody Home. Jimi Hendrix recorded Stop. Howard Tate's songs were exactly good enough to make other people famous. And the industry understood that and moved on. Tate stopped recording in the mid-1970s. The frustration was total. He said later, I was so bitter when I left the industry that I swore I would never give a glass of water to anybody in the music business if I saw them dying of thirst. By 1983, Howard Tate was living on the streets of Camden, New Jersey, sleeping in doorways, in abandoned cars. He spent 10 years that way, a decade. For 10 years, the man who wrote the songs that Janis Joplin sang to arenas full of people was homeless. The music industry did not look for him. The music industry presumed him dead. Some of you just got quiet. That is the right response. In 1994, a spiritual experience led Tate to found a small church in Mount Holly, New Jersey, where he spent his days ministering to the homeless and the addicted, people whose situation he understood from the inside. He built something back from nothing. On New Year's Day 2001, he was recognized in a grocery store in South Jersey by a former musician who told him, "A disc jockey on the radio has been playing your old records and asking listeners to call in if they know where you are." Howard Tate returned to music. He recorded, he toured. His 2003 album Rediscovered received a Grammy nomination. He died December 2, 2011, at the age of 72 in his apartment in Burlington City, New Jersey. He found his way back. Most people on this list did not get that chance. Number 5, Percy Mayfield. They called him the poet laureate of the blues. And that is not a promotional phrase. That is a precise description of what Percy Mayfield was, line by line, in the way he constructed a lyric. His songs did not reach for emotion. They arrived with it already present, already formed, already true. In 1950, Percy Mayfield recorded "Please Send Me Someone to Love." It entered the R&B chart and spent 27 weeks there. It reached number 1. The song has since been recorded by Dinah Washington, Etta James, Peggy Lee, Fiona Apple, and Sade. It became a standard, one of those songs that enters the American songbook without anyone quite deciding that it should. That is who Percy Mayfield was. In 1952, at the height of his success, Mayfield was returning from a performance in Las Vegas when the car he was riding in struck a stationary truck. The accident left him with severe facial disfigurement. His career as a performer, built on the ability to stand before an audience, was effectively ended. And I need you to hold that for a moment, because what happened next tells you exactly what this industry was. Percy Mayfield did not disappear. He kept writing. Ray Charles recognized what he had and hired him as a staff songwriter. And in 1961, Percy Mayfield gave Ray Charles a song called "Hit the Road, Jack." It reached number 1 on both the pop chart and the R&B chart simultaneously. It became one of the signature recordings of Ray Charles's entire career. You have heard that song your whole life. You have heard it in films, on the radio, at sporting events. The name most people associate with it is Ray Charles. The name behind the song is Percy Mayfield. This is the pattern I told you I would show you. An artist creates something extraordinary. The creation becomes a gift to the culture. The culture benefits enormously. The artist does not. Hold on to that, because the most complete and most deliberate version of that transaction is still coming. Percy Mayfield died on August 11, 1984, one day before his 64th birthday, having, as one historian put it, fallen back into obscurity. The poet laureate of the blues. The man who gave Ray Charles one of his greatest hits, died in poverty, died unknown to most of the people who had heard his work their entire lives. Some artists give everything to the culture. The culture does not always return the favor. Number 4, Frankie Lymon. You know this song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, has been part of the American air for nearly 70 years. You have heard it in commercials, in films, at weddings. In the first 4 notes, you recognize it. Let me give you the second kind of knowing, the kind that costs something to sit with. Franklin Joseph Lymon was born in Harlem in 1942. By the time he was 13, he was the lead voice of the Teenagers, an integrated doo-wop group from Washington Heights who rehearsed under the streetlights on the corner of 165th and Amsterdam. In 1956, when Frankie Lymon was 13 years old, Why Do Fools Fall in Love entered the national charts and reached the top. He became, in the most documented sense, the first black teenage pop star in American history. He appeared on television, he toured internationally. He was 13 years old, and the men who profited from what he was, the label heads, the publishing executives, the infrastructure that surrounded this child, began immediately to do what that industry did best. Frankie Lymon never received his songwriting royalties. The credits on Why Do Fools Fall in Love were manipulated by Morris Levy, the head of Roulette Records, a man with documented organized crime connections, until the royalty flow from that song went to Levy rather than to its creators. Lymon spent years attempting to recover what was owed to him. He never saw the money. By his mid-20s, he was an addict trying to hold together a comeback. He said publicly in 1966, "I have been born again," and there is every reason to believe he meant it. On February 27, 1968, Frankie Lymon was found dead on the floor of his grandmother's bathroom in Harlem. He was 25 years old. He died of a heroin overdose. He died bankrupt. He had a recording session scheduled for the very next morning, the beginning of a comeback that would never come. 3 wives, whom he had married and never divorced, fought over an estate that contained almost nothing. The song played on. If this name is new to you, that is not your fault. But I want to be clear about who put him in that position. It was not an accident. It was not misfortune. The men who built their businesses on the back of a 13-year-old's talent had every means and no intention of making it right. Number 3, James Carr. James Carr has been called, by serious music historians and serious musicians over 60 years, the world's greatest soul singer. Dan Penn, one of the songwriters who gave him his most famous song, said there was no other version of that song worth hearing. Peter Guralnick, who has documented this music more carefully and honestly than almost anyone, called him a magisterial singer. These are not compliments, these are a form of grief. James Carr was born in Coahoma County, Mississippi in 1942. His family moved to Memphis when he was 3. He grew up singing in the church. He was turned down by Stax Records and signed with Goldwax, a small Memphis independent. In 1967, he walked into Royal Studios and recorded The Dark End of the Street. That recording has been covered by Percy Sledge, Aretha Franklin, Linda Ronstadt, Graham Parsons, Elvis Costello, Richard and Linda Thompson, and hundreds of others. Every serious singer who has encountered it has felt the need to try to do what James Carr did. None of them have fully managed it. What James Carr could not do, for much of his life, was get through the day. He suffered from bipolar disorder for most of his adult life. He was illiterate. He memorized every lyric he ever recorded by rote. He would abandon recording sessions, sometimes sitting in silence for hours before a word came. He froze on a stage in Tokyo in 1979, unable to sing in front of an audience. He spent most of the 1980s moving between his sister's home in a poor area of Memphis and psychiatric hospitals. The music industry moved on without a backward look. Some of you are going to look James Carr up after this video ends. Good! That is exactly the point, because the recordings are there, the dark end of the street is there, and the voice on those tracks, that specific voice, is still waiting for anyone willing to understand what soul music actually is, at its most complete and most unguarded. Go find it. James Carr died on January 7, 2001, in a Memphis nursing home. He was 58 years old, and he was dying of lung cancer, and almost no one was paying attention. The music he left behind is extraordinary. The attention it received in his lifetime was not. Number 2, Little Willie John. You know Fever. You may know Peggy Lee's version best, the 1958 recording, stripped to finger snaps and bass, and that cool, deliberate voice. It became her signature song. It defined a phase of her career. It was one of the most important recordings of her life. Let me give you the second kind of knowing. Knowing the song and knowing what it cost to make it, those are two different things. In 1956, Little Willie John, 18 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, one of the most vocally incandescent performers anyone in the R&B world had encountered, walked into the studio and recorded Fever, his version, the original. The one that created the structure, the feeling, and the template for everything that came after. B.B. King, who admired him deeply, described his voice as possessing an almost painful intensity of feeling. Marvin Gaye cited him as a formative influence. Smokey Robinson cited him. James Brown, who in his early career had opened shows for Little Willie John, felt so strongly about what had been lost when John died that he dedicated an entire album to his memory. Not a song, an album. This is the pattern I told you about, the one that runs through this list in its most complete form. While Peggy Lee's version of Fever was playing on every radio station in America, while her career ascended on the strength of what Little Willie John had created, what was happening to him? He was arrested in 1964 following a fatal altercation at an after-show party in Seattle. He was convicted of manslaughter in 1966 and sentenced to 8 to 20 years at Walla Walla State Penitentiary in Washington State. He died in that prison on May 26, 1968, 2 months before he was eligible for parole. The cause of death is listed on his death certificate as a heart attack. Others have reported pneumonia, Some who were close to this story have suggested he did not die of natural causes. The truth has never been fully established. He was 30 years old. The music survived, the name did not. And that is not the same thing. Talent without documentation is just genius with no witnesses. But little Willie John had witnesses. He had B.B. King and James Brown and Smokey Robinson and Marvin Gaye, all of them willing to testify to what he was. None of that was enough to get him out of that prison. None of that was enough to keep him alive. None of that was enough to give him the proper telling his voice deserved. Number 1. Esther Phillips. Esther Mae Washington, known professionally as Esther Phillips, known before that to the people who discovered her first as Little Esther. Let me tell you who this was. In 1949, a 14-year-old girl from Watts won a talent contest at a local blues club. Johnny Otis was in the audience. He was so struck by what he heard that he recorded her immediately, added her to his review, and billed her as Little Esther. In 1950, she recorded Double Crossing Blues with the Johnny Otis Orchestra. It reached number 1 on the R&B chart. She was 15 years old. That is who this was. 15 years old, number 1 on the R&B chart. A voice so formed, so complete, that the people who knew this music recognized it immediately as something rare and irreplaceable. In 1962, after years of personal struggle with addiction that had pushed her out of the spotlight, she was rediscovered singing in a Houston club by a young Kenny Rogers, who helped get her signed to a new label. She recorded Release Me, and it reached number 1 on the R&B chart, and the top 10 on the pop chart, and the top 10 on the country chart, simultaneously. A black woman from Watts in 1962, crossing into the top 10 of the country chart at the same moment as the R&B chart. The music industry did not know what to do with that. And so it did what it knew. In the early 1970s, she recorded Home Is Where the Hatred Is, Gil Scott-Heron's unflinching portrait of heroin addiction. She sang it the way you can only sing something you carry inside you. The performance is still, to those who have heard it, one of the most honest recordings in the history of this music. She received a Grammy nomination for Best R&B Vocal Performance. She lost. Aretha Franklin won. And Aretha Franklin, and this is documented and I want you to sit with what it means. Aretha Franklin felt that Esther Phillips had delivered the greater performance. That the Grammy had gone to the wrong person. And so Aretha Franklin went to Esther Phillips and gave her the Grammy, physically placed it in her hands, said this should have been yours. Esther Phillips received 4 Grammy nominations across her career. She was nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, in 1986 and 1987. She was never inducted. And here is the truth of what happened, the truth that this name carries, and that this channel exists to speak plainly. When Esther Phillips died on August 7, 1984, she was 48 years old. She died of liver and kidney failure, the accumulated cost of decades of addiction, and a body that had been asked to give more than it had left. She died with nothing. She was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave in Compton, California. I need you to hold that. The woman who reached #1 on the R&B chart at 15 years old. The woman whose Grammy another artist believed she deserved more than her own. Buried in a pauper's grave, unmarked, in Compton. A year later, Johnny Otis, the man who had first heard her sing when she was 14, organized a fundraiser so that her remains could be moved to Forest Lawn Memorial Park and properly interred. A fundraiser for Esther Phillips,